welcome to another edition of Inside PressBox. On this week's program, we'll talk with Chris Hutchins of Aloha Tournaments about next weekend's Summer Sizzle Lacrosse Tournament. We'll take a look back at Lac Splash, also run by the folks at Aloha Tournament, which took place in June. But first, let's take a look at our photo of the week. The photo of the week brought to you by Yingling Lager, a true American classic. Taste the quality that 180 years of family-owned and operated tradition brews into every single bottle. This picture, sadly, this week is of former Colts tight end John Mackey, who passed away this week at the age of 69 due to complications resulting from dementia. This picture shown here, compliments of the Sports Legends Museum, is John Mackey and Johnny Unitas in Westminster, and it was taken on July the 22nd, 1967. That's nearly 44 years ago. Mackey was the second tight end inducted into the NFL Hall of Fame. And we welcome with us right now Dr. Kevin Crutchfield, who you treated John Mackey in your capacity as Director of Comprehensive Brain Injuries and Concussions at Sinai.
I did. The last year I did.
Okay. And because of that, beyond conjecture and things like that, we can't really talk about John Mackey, but we can talk about some of the symptoms that would go into what he was afflicted with. Is
Correct.
that a fair way to say it?
Sure. There's a condition called chronic traumatic encephalopathy, which is a form of frontal temporal dementia, and it comes from repeated concussive blows to the front part of the brain, the frontal lobe, and the temporal lobes, which subserve memory function.
So explain one thing to me. Repeated blows to the frontal part of the head, right?
Correct.
Back when John Mackey played college ball in the early 60s, into the 70s in pro football, maybe up till 1980-ish or something, how many concussions would a player like that receive and go back in? I'm comparing it today to another guy that you've examined briefly, I believe, Brian Roberts. So I'm just looking at the difference in these 44 years in terms of what we know about these injuries and prevent players from going back out to play again.
Right.
I know that's a long-winded question.
Right. There's a lot tucked into that statement you just made. It's been my observation, taking care of athletes and non-athletes who sustain brain injuries, that it's a bell curve. The average time it takes for the brain to heal after a relatively minor injury, as we call them, they're not minor to the patients, by the way, but
Sure.
we grade them as minor, is about 7 days, which is why Major League Baseball has a mandatory 7-day disabled list when baseball players get a concussion now.
That's just recently implemented in the last year, right?
That's correct, in the last several weeks, actually.
So, okay.
But there are really rapid healers and there are delayed healers that I've been seeing clinically. And it's my hypothesis that if you're a rapid healer, you go through and you continue playing that game. Every football player is going to have some form of a concussive blow in their career because of the nature of the game. If you don't heal quickly, you're uncomfortable and you're in pain. You don't continue to play. So if you had concussions in high school and it took you forever to get better, you're not going to want to play in college. And same thing in college. If the hits in college cause you to heal slower, you don't go on to play in the NFL. So I believe that the NFL players are the survival of the fittest. They get concussive blows, but they used to heal quickly. And it's when the players start to heal slower that takes them longer to get over that concussive blow than it used to the year before, the year before that. That's when they're beginning to make these decisions to retire because they've had too many concussions. When they shift into becoming a delayed healer.
But the one thing is, so in other words, but the real damage comes from the fact that they are fast healers, because what I'm hearing is that they may not really have been healed, but they're less symptomatic than slow healers.
Correct. I mean, there's data.
Is that a fair way to say that?
Yes, and it's quite interesting. We don't really understand the science behind all of this, so none of this is hard and fast or proven clinically. But the data is coming out from Boston University, where they have the Sports Legacy Institute, where they're getting the brains of these retired players that have played sports where they get repeated concussions, hockey players, football players, and they're showing the deposition of this pathologic tau protein in the frontal and temporal region specifically, where if you take certain kinds of blows from certain angles, you're going to get a lot of transfer of kinetic energy.
Will there come a time where these brain injuries will be able to be treated directly with drugs or something that will help the healing process?
Well,
and I'm not talking about faster, better.
Correct. Well, that's the hope of any disease process when you start to understand it and study it. And there's a lot of people out there who want to make quote-unquote biomarkers of concussion because you can diagnose it and potentially track intervention of treatments. And a lot of the conferences I've been to, I like to stress, I want a biomarker that informs me of the pathophysiology of the disease process so that we can develop interventional therapies, whether they be drugs or even some dietary things, may actually cease that chronic chemical change pathway that gets induced from that concussive blow.
Let me ask you this. We've got less than 2 minutes to go on this. You know, we could talk, you and I have talked before about this topic, so we could go on and on and on. Quality of life for somebody who's got serious encephalopathy. What are the pathways toward where it ends, the dementia?
Well, it's a progressive process. And early on, it may be just the patient becomes angrier, easier, or actually gets depression in midlife, can't make decisions. And while there's still enough awareness of self, that can be incredibly frustrating and aggravating and scary for the patient. When the patient then progresses through that to the later stages of the disease, they lose awareness of self. So they become dimensionless, and I'm not so sure that's uncomfortable for them per se, because they have no perception of where they are or where they're supposed to be.
But it's uncomfortable, it can be extremely uncomfortable for those that knew and loved this person.
Oh, no question.
To watch what they are today
Correct.
Versus what they were.
Correct. My grandfather died of Alzheimer's disease, so I've lived through the chronic stages of a dementing illness and what it does to families. It's very stressful for families to care for someone in the sense of guilt and you know, why doesn't he understand me anymore?
Last question. If you know what you know, would you let a son of yours play football?
I did.
Okay. And how can we prevent what kind of happened to the John Mackeys, the Dave Duersons?
Well, we have to understand it better. You know, the awareness level is exponentially greater than last time you and I spoke, and I think that's critical to understand that. Getting the kids out when they're injured, examining their nervous system, and not letting them go back in and play until their brain is completely healed. As I tell the players from 8 years old and up and through the professional grades, I'm not here to keep you from playing. I'm here to make sure it's safe for you to go back in and play when you're ready to play.
Dr. Crutchfield, thank you.
Sure.
It's great to talk to you on this topic. Sad that we have to talk about it under these circumstances. This portion of Inside PressBox has been brought to you by the Maryland Lottery's Double Play Scratch Off. Scratch the front, peel the back, plus enter non-winning tickets at mdlottery.com/doubleplay for a chance to win cash and great Orioles prizes.